The crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead like frozen fireworks. The young woman in the black vest and white shirt moved between tables, balancing a silver tray loaded with champagne flutes. Her feet were killing her. These borrowed heels were half a size too small, but they were the only black ones she owned that looked presentable enough for an event like this. She'd been on her feet for 3 hours straight. Her name tag read Server 7, because the Grandmont Hotel had 12 waitstaff working tonight, and remembering names wasn't really necessary for people who were just supposed to blend into the background. That was fine by her. She preferred being invisible at these fancy events anyway. The ballroom was magnificent. Everything about it screamed money and elegance. Red velvet curtains framed a stage where a grand piano sat like a piece of art. The guests wore designer gowns and perfectly tailored suits. Diamond earrings caught the light with every turn of a head. These were the kind of people who wrote checks with more zeros than most folks saw in a year. Tonight was some kind of charity gala. She wasn't entirely sure what cause they were supporting. Something about arts education, maybe? Or youth programs. The details didn't really matter to the serving staff. Their job was simple. Keep the drinks flowing, clear the plates, smile politely, and stay out of the way. A burst of applause erupted from the audience. The pianist took a small bow and walked off stage. The woman shifted her empty tray to her other arm and headed back toward the kitchen. Intermission had started, which meant the next rush would be coming soon. Everyone would want fresh drinks and more of those tiny appetizers that cost more per bite than her entire lunch. In the kitchen, her coworker grabbed her arm. "Did you hear? The pianist's leaving." "What do you mean leaving?" "The event's only half over. Family emergency. Her dad's in the hospital or something. She just got the call." They both peeked through the service door. Sure enough, the pianist was near the stage, her face pale and worried, talking urgently with the woman running the event. The coordinator looked like she might faint. Her phone was pressed to her ear, and even from across the room you could see the panic in her eyes. The woman with the tray understood that panic. This wasn't just any performance. The whole second half of the evening was built around audience participation. Rich people would make donations, request their favorite songs, and the pianist would play them. It was the main fundraising strategy for the night. Without a pianist, the whole thing would fall apart. She watched the coordinator make phone call after phone call. Each conversation ended with the same defeated look. It was Saturday night. Every professional musician in the city was already booked. Nobody was available on an hour's notice. The woman's fingers twitched. She caught herself and made a fist, trying to stop the familiar ache. It had been almost 2 years since she'd played a real piano. 2 years since her whole life had changed direction. These days, she practiced on a silent electronic keyboard in her tiny studio apartment, wearing headphones so she wouldn't disturb the neighbors. The keys didn't feel right and the sound was flat and artificial, but it was all she could afford. She used to dream about stages like this one. Used to imagine herself performing in rooms exactly like this ballroom, with audiences actually paying attention instead of just showing up because it was the social thing to do. That life felt like it belonged to someone else now, someone younger, someone who hadn't watched their dreams get packed away in boxes to make room for medical bills and late-night shifts. Her mother had gotten sick during her second semester at music school, the kind of sick that comes with words like intensive care and experimental treatment, and bills that insurance only partially covered. The scholarship covered tuition, but it didn't cover leaving school mid-semester to become a full-time caregiver. It didn't cover the fact that you can't practice piano 8 hours a day when you're working double shifts and spending every free moment at the hospital. By the time her mother passed away, the scholarship was gone. The spot in the program had been given to someone else. And somehow picking up where she left off felt impossible. The grief was too heavy. The debt was too large. And honestly, sitting at a piano reminded her too much of everything she'd lost. So she'd found work where she could. Restaurants, catering companies, hotels. The Grandmont was actually one of the better gigs. They treated their staff decently. The pay was fair. And events like this one meant generous tips from guilty rich people who wanted to feel good about themselves. She loaded up another tray and headed back out. The coordinator was still making calls, her voice getting more desperate with each one. Some guests were starting to notice the commotion. Whispers rippled through the crowd. This wasn't good. These people had paid premium prices for their tickets and they expected a premium experience. The woman delivered drinks to a table near the front. An elderly gentleman in an expensive suit was explaining something about quarterly returns to his companions. None of them looked up as she placed their glasses down. She was part of the scenery, as forgettable as the wallpaper. She'd gotten used to it. Being invisible had its advantages. You could observe people without them noticing. You could hear conversations that weren't meant for your ears. You learned that rich people weren't really that different from anyone else. They had the same petty arguments, the same insecurities, the same need to impress each other. Walking back toward the kitchen, she passed close enough to hear the coordinator's latest phone conversation. "I understand, but this is an emergency." "No, I realize it's short notice." "Yes, I know what union rates are." The woman stopped walking. Her heart started beating faster. This was a terrible idea. A really, really terrible idea. But her feet weren't moving. She stood there, tray in hand, having some kind of internal argument with herself. She was rusty. She hadn't performed for a real audience in years. She was wearing a waitress uniform, for crying out loud. These people would laugh her off the stage, except she knew she was good, or at least she used to be good. Her teachers had told her she had something special. Not just technical skill, but the ability to make people feel something when she played. That's what had earned her the scholarship in the first place. And what was the worst that could happen? They'd say no? She'd go back to serving drinks? She was already doing that. Her mouth was dry. Her hands were sweating. This was stupid. This was absolutely, completely stupid. She walked up to the coordinator, who had just ended another unsuccessful call. "Excuse me," she heard herself say. Her voice sounded strange and far away. "I might be able to help." The coordinator turned to look at her. Really look at her. Maybe for the first time all evening. There was desperation in her eyes mixed with confusion. A waitress? What could a waitress possibly do to help with a missing pianist? But then the woman saw something else flicker across the coordinator's face. It was the look of someone who'd run out of options and was willing to try anything, even something that seemed completely impossible. "Come with me," the coordinator said, already walking toward the stage. The woman followed, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Behind her, the other servers were staring. One of them mouthed, "What are you doing?" She had no idea. But for the first time in 2 years, her fingers weren't just twitching with memory. They were ready to actually play. The backstage area was a completely different world from the glittering ballroom. Exposed brick walls, dim lighting, and stacks of equipment cases lined the narrow hallway. The coordinator walked fast, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. The woman in the waitress uniform struggled to keep up, her borrowed shoes pinching with every step. They stopped in front of a door marked Green Room. The coordinator turned to face her, and for the first time that night, actually looked at her like a real person instead of just another member of the staff. "Okay, level with me. Can you actually play piano? Because I'm desperate enough to try anything right now, but I can't put someone up there who's going to embarrass us both." The woman swallowed hard. "I went to music school. Had a scholarship. I can play. Had. Past tense. I had to leave. Family stuff. Medical bills. You know how it goes." She didn't want to get into the details, not now. Maybe not ever with this stranger. The coordinator studied her face, probably trying to decide if this was worth the risk. "What kind of music school?" "Conservatory program. Classical training, but I can do jazz, contemporary, pretty much anything." "And you just happen to be working as a waitress at my event?" The woman almost laughed at that. Almost. "Yeah, well, talent doesn't pay the rent. Had to find work that actually came with a paycheck." Something in the coordinator's expression softened. Maybe she understood more than she let on. Maybe she'd had her own dreams that didn't work out. Either way, she opened the door to the green room and gestured inside. The room was small and cluttered. Makeup lights lined one mirror. A rack of formal clothes hung in the corner. Probably backups for the original pianist. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the upright piano pushed against the far wall. "Show me," the coordinator said simply. The woman walked to the piano like she was approaching an old friend she hadn't seen in years. Her hands shook as she lifted the fallboard. The keys were ivory, yellowed with age, but beautiful. She touched one just barely, and the notes sang out clear and true. She sat down on the bench. It wobbled slightly, one leg shorter than the others. She didn't care. Her fingers found their positions automatically, muscle memory kicking in from thousands of hours of practice. She started with scales. C major up and down, then minor scales, chromatic scales. Her fingers were stiff at first, clumsy. 2 years of only practicing on a silent keyboard had taken their toll. But as she moved through the exercises, something began to wake up inside her. Then she switched to something harder, a piece by Rachmaninoff, one of the technically demanding ones with huge chord progressions and runs that required your hands to fly across the keys. She stumbled in places, hit a few wrong notes. Her timing wasn't perfect, but the music was there, buried under the rust, waiting to come out. When she finished, her hands were trembling. She looked up at the coordinator, expecting disappointment or doubt. Instead, the woman's eyebrows were practically touching her hairline. "You're actually good. Like really good. I'm rusty. I haven't played a real piano in almost 2 years. You could have fooled me." The coordinator pulled out her phone, checking the time. "Okay, here's the situation. The second half is supposed to start in 15 minutes. The whole format is audience requests. People donate money, ask for a song, you play it. Can you handle that? Sight reading, improvising if you don't know something?" The woman thought about it. Back in school, she'd accompanied singers and instrumentalists all the time. She'd played at church services where people would randomly request hymns. She'd worked a few gigs at piano bars where drunk people would shout out song titles and expect her to just know them. "I can handle it," she said, hoping that was true. "The audience won't know you're not the scheduled performer. Well, not at first anyway. I'll have to explain the situation. But I'll introduce you as an accomplished pianist who graciously stepped in. Just keep them happy and keep them donating. That's all I need." The woman looked down at her waitress uniform. The black vest had a small stain from earlier when someone's champagne glass had tipped. Her white shirt was wrinkled. Her name tag still read Server 7. "I'm dressed like I'm about to take their drink orders." The coordinator glanced at the clock on the wall. "No time to change. Besides, maybe it'll make you more relatable. These people are here for charity, right? Seeing someone rise to the occasion, stepping up despite circumstances. That's a good story. They'll eat it up." That felt cynical, but the woman understood the logic. Rich people love stories about overcoming obstacles as long as they got to watch from a safe distance. "I'll need a few minutes with the piano out there. The real one. Just to get a feel for it. You've got 5 minutes. Make them count." They walked back through the hallway, but this time the woman wasn't following. She was walking beside the coordinator, almost like an equal. It was strange how quickly things could shift. Backstage, she could hear the murmur of the audience through the curtain. Hundreds of people out there, all expecting a professional performance, all expecting someone who belonged on that stage. The coordinator led her to the wings. From this angle, the woman could see the piano in profile. It was magnificent, a Steinway grand, probably worth more than everything she owned combined. The stage lights made it glow. "It's all yours," the coordinator said. "Don't make me regret this." The woman stepped onto the stage while the curtain was still down. The space felt enormous. The piano sat in a pool of light like it was the only thing that mattered in the world. She approached it carefully, almost reverently. This wasn't like the upright in the green room. This was a concert grand, the kind of instrument she'd dreamed of playing on but rarely got the chance. She sat at the bench, adjusted the height, and placed her hands on the keys. The first chord told her everything. The tone was rich and warm, with a resonance that the upright couldn't match. Each key responded to the slightest change in pressure, letting her shape the dynamics exactly how she wanted. She played a few passages, testing different registers. The bass notes rumbled with power. The treble sang with clarity. This piano had been perfectly tuned, perfectly maintained. Playing it felt like driving a sports car after years of riding the bus. But with that beauty came pressure. An instrument this good would expose every mistake, every hesitation, every moment of doubt. She ran through some of the pieces she knew by heart. Classical standards that people might request. Popular songs she'd learned over the years. Her fingers were warming up, getting reacquainted with what it felt like to play a real piano with real weight and real sound. The coordinator appeared at the edge of the stage. "Time's up. You ready?" Was she ready? That was a complicated question. She was terrified. Her heart was racing. Part of her wanted to run back to the kitchen, grab her tray, and forget this whole crazy idea. But another part of her, the part that had gotten buried under grief and bills and exhaustion, was waking up. That part remembered why she'd fallen in love with music in the first place. It wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about the moment when your fingers touched the keys and something magic happened. Something that couldn't be explained, only felt. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I'm ready." "Good, I'm going to explain the situation to the audience. When I introduce you, just walk out and start playing. Don't overthink it. These people are already 3 drinks in. They're not music critics," the woman wanted to believe that. But she'd seen how these audiences could turn. They might be charitable and generous, but they also expected value for their money. One wrong move and she'd become the story they'd tell at brunch tomorrow, laughing about the waitress who thought she could play piano. She heard the coordinator's heels clicking across the stage as the curtain began to rise. The murmur of the audience grew louder. She stayed in the wings, hidden in shadow, waiting for her cue. The coordinator's voice came through the microphone, apologetic but professional. She explained about the family emergency, thanked everyone for their understanding, and then said something that made the woman's stomach drop. "Fortunately, we have someone who has graciously agreed to step in. She's an accomplished pianist, and I know she'll provide a wonderful experience for the rest of the evening." That was it. No more hiding. No more time to doubt. The woman took a deep breath, smoothed down her wrinkled shirt, and walked into the light. The lights were brighter than she'd expected. Hot and blinding, the woman walked across the stage, very aware that hundreds of eyes were following her every step. She could hear the confused whispers rippling through the crowd like a wave. "Wait, isn't that the waitress? Why is she on stage? Where's the pianist we paid for?" Her cheeks burned, but she kept walking. The piano waited for her, solid and real. That was all that mattered. She sat down on the bench, adjusted her position, and for just a moment, let her hands rest on her lap. The audience was still murmuring. She could feel their skepticism like a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. These people had spent thousands of dollars on tickets tonight. They'd come expecting a professional performance, champagne and caviar, not some random staff member in a wrinkled uniform. An elderly woman in the front row leaned toward her companion. She didn't bother lowering her voice. "Well, this should be interesting." The words stung, but they also sparked something. That old competitive fire that she thought had died along with her dreams. She'd spent 2 years being invisible, being dismissed, being treated like she didn't matter. And you know what? She was tired of it. Her hands moved to the keys. She'd been planning to start with something safe. Maybe a gentle Chopin prelude. Something pretty and uncontroversial that would ease everyone into accepting the situation. But that's not what her fingers played. Instead, she launched into Liszt, Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2. One of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire, the kind of piece that requires your hands to fly across the keyboard, that builds from quiet introspection to thunderous drama, that separates the amateurs from the real players. It was a risk. A huge risk. If she messed it up, she'd prove everyone's doubts right, but she was done playing it safe. The opening notes rolled out across the ballroom, slow and haunting. Her left hand established the rhythm while her right hand picked out the melody. The piece started quietly, almost delicate, giving no hint of the storm to come. The murmuring stopped. That was the first victory. She moved into the faster section, her fingers dancing across the keys. This was the dangerous part, where one mistake could derail everything. But her muscle memory kicked in, guiding her through passages she'd practiced 10,000 times in another life. The piece demanded everything from her. Precision, power, emotion. She gave it all, pouring 2 years of frustration and loss and suppressed dreams into every measure, every late-night shift she'd worked instead of practicing. Every time she'd walked past a concert hall and felt that ache of what could have been. Every moment she'd convinced herself that this part of her life was over. All of it went into the music. Her hands were flying now, reaching for the dramatic runs that made this piece famous. The piano sang under her fingers, each note clear and true. The Steinway was responding to her every touch, amplifying her emotions and filling the ballroom with sound that seemed to come from somewhere beyond technique. She hit the climactic section, the part where both hands work in thundering parallel octaves. The chandelier above her seemed to vibrate with the force of it. This wasn't pretty background music for people to ignore while they sipped champagne. This was music that demanded attention, and she had it. Every single person in that ballroom was watching her now. The piece built to its famous ending, those dramatic final chords that ring out like exclamation points. She struck them with everything she had, letting them echo through the space. Then silence. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. She sat at the piano, her hands still on the keys, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. Had she gone too far? Was the silence a bad sign? Then the applause started. Not polite charity applause. Real applause. The kind that starts with 1 or 2 people and builds until everyone is standing. Until the sound fills every corner of the room. The elderly woman in the front row was on her feet, clapping hard enough that her diamond bracelets caught the light. The skeptical companion beside her looked stunned. The woman at the piano stood and gave a small, awkward bow. She wasn't used to this. Wasn't used to being really seen by anyone. Her face felt hot and her legs were shaking. But something inside her chest was expanding, filling spaces that had been empty for so long. The coordinator appeared at the edge of the stage, trying to look professional but clearly shocked. She grabbed the microphone. Well, I think we can all agree that we're in excellent hands for the rest of the evening. More applause. Someone whistled. As I mentioned, tonight's format allows you to make donations and request songs. Our pianist will do her best to accommodate all requests. Let's start with our first donor of the evening. A man in an expensive suit stood up. He pulled out his phone, probably checking his banking app to make a donation. That was incredible. Can you play some Gershwin? Rhapsody in Blue? She nodded. Gershwin she could do. That piece was jazz-influenced classical, which meant she could put her own spin on it if needed. She sat back down and dove in, letting the famous opening clarinet glissando translate through the piano keys. The requests kept coming. Each donation triggered another song. Some people asked for classical pieces. Others wanted jazz standards or even pop songs. A middle-aged woman asked for something by Billy Joel. A young tech executive requested a theme from a movie soundtrack. She handled everything. When she didn't know a piece perfectly, she improvised, finding the melody and building around it. Her years of accompanying other musicians had taught her how to think on her feet, how to make something beautiful even when you didn't have all the notes memorized. Between songs, people started asking questions. Where had she trained? Why was she working at the hotel? What was her story? She kept her answers brief. I went to music school for a while. Life took me in a different direction. I still love to play when I get the chance. She didn't mention her mother, didn't talk about the medical bills or the grief or the nights when she'd sit at her silent keyboard and cry because playing on that fake thing with headphones on felt like a mockery of what music was supposed to be. That wasn't their business. They didn't need to know the details of her pain. The music said everything that mattered. In the back of the ballroom, a man was watching more intently than anyone else. He was older, probably in his 70s, with silver hair and an expensive watch that caught the light when he moved. He'd made his career in the music industry decades ago, discovering talent and turning unknown artists into household names. He'd come tonight as a favor to a friend on the charity board, expecting to be bored. He'd planned to make his donation, sit through some mediocre entertainment and leave early. But he wasn't bored now. He was leaning forward in his seat, studying every movement of the woman at the piano. He'd heard technically perfect performances before, plenty of them. But this was different. This woman wasn't just playing notes on a page. She was telling a story with every phrase, connecting with something raw and honest that most trained musicians spent their whole careers trying to fake. He pulled out his phone and made a note to himself. He wanted to talk to this woman before the night was over. On stage, she was midway through another request, some romantic ballad she'd learned years ago. Her fingers found the chords automatically while her mind wandered slightly. This was surreal. 3 hours ago, she'd been serving drinks and trying not to think about how much her feet hurt. Now she was doing what she was born to do, what she'd given up on ever doing again. A young woman raised her hand for the next request. Could you play something original? Something you wrote yourself? The question caught her off guard. She paused, her hands hovering over the keys. I'm not sure that's what people want to hear tonight, but others in the audience were nodding, agreeing with the suggestion. Yes, play something of yours. The coordinator gave her an encouraging nod from the side of the stage. The woman took a deep breath. She'd written dozens of pieces over the years. Most of them were still just scribbled notes in old notebooks, half-finished ideas that she'd never had time to develop. But there was one piece that lived fully formed in her head. One that she played sometimes on her silent keyboard in the dark hours after a late shift, when sleep wouldn't come. She'd written it after her mother died. It had poured out of her during one long night, when the grief felt like it might swallow her whole. She'd never played it for anyone, never even considered sharing it. But here now, with an audience of strangers who'd already seen her at her most vulnerable, it felt like maybe this was the moment. Her hands found the opening chord, soft, hesitant, like the first light of dawn. After the longest night, the opening chord hung in the air like a question without an answer. She let it fade completely before playing the next one. This piece wasn't meant to be rushed. It needed space to breathe, room for silence between the notes. She'd called it After the Storm in her head, though she'd never written that title down anywhere. It started quiet and uncertain, like someone taking their first steps after being knocked down. The melody was simple at first, just a few notes repeating, searching for direction. Her left hand added a gentle rhythm underneath. Nothing fancy, just a heartbeat, steady and constant, the kind that reminds you you're still alive even when you don't want to be. The ballroom had gone completely still. Even the servers standing along the walls had stopped moving. There was something about this piece, something raw and unpolished, that demanded attention in a different way than the flashy Liszt or the familiar Gershwin. She moved into the second section, where the melody started to climb. The notes came faster now, building on each other, representing all those moments when you think you might be okay, when you catch yourself almost smiling at something stupid. The music gained confidence, the chords getting fuller, richer, but then it pulled back. Because healing isn't linear. The melody dropped into a minor key, became questioning again. Her right hand played fragments of the earlier theme, but broken up, scattered like memories that hurt too much to look at all at once. She was crying. She didn't realize it until a tear hit her hand. But she kept playing because this was the truth of it. This was what the piece was about. It was about loss and grief and those impossible early mornings when you wake up and for 1 second, you forget they're gone. And then you remember and it hits you all over again. Several people in the audience were crying too. The elderly woman in the front row had her hand pressed to her chest. A man 3 rows back had his head bowed. These people with their expensive clothes and their comfortable lives, they understood this language. Pain was universal. Loss didn't care about your bank account. The piece shifted again, entering the final movement. This was the part she'd struggled to write, the part that had taken her weeks to figure out. Because how do you musically represent acceptance? How do you capture that strange place where you're still sad but you're also somehow okay? The melody returned to the opening theme but transformed. It was the same notes but played differently now. Slower, more intentional, with a depth that only comes from having survived something you didn't think you could survive. Her left hand added new harmonies underneath, supporting the melody, giving it foundation. The piece was saying that you don't forget. You don't move on like people keep telling you to, but you do keep going. You do find moments of beauty again, and maybe that's enough. The final chord was neither happy nor sad. It just was. She held it, letting it ring out until it faded into nothing, until the last vibration died away and silence returned. Nobody moved. The moment felt sacred somehow, like breaking the silence would shatter something fragile and important. Finally, someone started clapping. Then another person. Then everyone. But it was different from the applause after the list. That had been appreciation for technical skill, for a dazzling performance. This was something else. This was recognition. These strangers were telling her they'd heard what she was really saying. She wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed by the tears. She wasn't supposed to fall apart up here. She was supposed to be the entertainment, the background music to their charity event. But when she looked out at the audience, half of them were wiping their eyes too. The coordinator stepped onto the stage, and for a moment the woman thought she was in trouble, thought she'd made things too personal, too uncomfortable. But the coordinator was smiling, her own eyes suspiciously bright. "I think we all needed that," she said into the microphone. "Thank you for sharing something so personal with us." The silver-haired man in the back stood up. He wasn't as tall as the woman had expected, and he moved carefully like someone whose body didn't quite keep up with his mind anymore. But there was an energy about him, a presence that made people turn to look. He pulled out his phone and made a donation. The coordinator glanced at her screen and her eyebrows shot up. Whatever amount he'd given, it was significant. That was extraordinary. he said, his voice carrying across the ballroom even without a microphone. Young lady, what you just played? That's the kind of music that reminds people why they fell in love with music in the first place. She didn't know what to say to that. Thank you seemed inadequate. I have a request, he continued. But it's unusual. I'd like you to play whatever you want. Not something I choose. Not something from a list. Just whatever piece of music you'd play if this were your concert, if you could perform anything in the world right now. The woman stared at him. That was possibly the most terrifying request anyone could make. With specific songs, there were guidelines, expectations, but this was asking her to expose herself completely. Are you sure? She asked. I'm sure. Consider my donation an investment in hearing you play something that matters to you. She thought about it. If this were her concert, what would she play? Not to impress anyone. Not to prove anything. Just for the pure love of the music itself. The answer came quickly. There was a piece by Debussy, Clair de Lune, that she'd always connected with. It was famous, almost overplayed, but she didn't care. It was beautiful. And sometimes that was reason enough. She started playing and immediately understood why she'd chosen it. After the emotional weight of her original piece, Clair de Lune felt like a gentle hand on her shoulder, like someone telling her it was okay to find peace. The flowing melody washed over the room like moonlight through water. She played it the way she'd always heard it in her head, not worrying about how other pianists interpreted it or what the correct tempo was supposed to be. This was her version, her truth. The silver-haired man watched her with a slight smile. He'd been in the music business for over 40 years. He'd worked with legends, produced albums that defined generations, and he'd developed an instinct for talent that went beyond technical ability. This woman had it, that indefinable quality that separated the good from the unforgettable. She didn't just play music. She inhabited it, made you believe that these notes, this melody, existed solely for this moment. When the piece ended, he was already making plans. He pulled a business card from his wallet, something he rarely carried anymore but had grabbed tonight out of habit. As soon as there was a break, he'd talk to her, make his pitch. He was retired technically, but for someone like this, he'd make an exception. The requests continued for another hour. The donations kept climbing. The charity was going to exceed their fundraising goal by a ridiculous margin, and everyone knew it was because of the woman at the piano. People weren't just giving out of obligation anymore. They were giving because they wanted this night to continue, wanted to hear more, wanted to be part of whatever was happening. She played jazz standards and classical showpieces. She played a Beatles song and somehow made it sound like it belonged in a concert hall. She even played Happy Birthday for someone's husband. But she played it in the style of different composers, turning it into a game where the audience tried to guess who she was imitating. Her fingers were getting tired. Her back was starting to ache from sitting so long, but she didn't want to stop. This felt like borrowed time, like a dream she'd wake up from any minute. She wanted to hold on to it for as long as possible. During a brief pause while people made donations and decided on requests, the coordinator brought her a glass of water. You're doing amazing. I can't thank you enough. I should be thanking you, the woman said. I didn't know how much I needed this. Well, you're not the only one benefiting. Check the donation total. The woman glanced at the screen the coordinator showed her. The number made her dizzy. They'd raised 3 times what they'd projected. 3 times. That's because of you, the coordinator said. People are telling their friends to come down here. We've had people show up in the last 30 minutes just because they heard about what was happening. A young couple had just arrived, slightly breathless like they'd rushed over. The woman was holding her phone, probably had seen something on social media. They found seats near the back, eager to catch whatever remained of the performance. The silver-haired man caught the coordinator's attention and gestured that he wanted to speak. She nodded and called a short intermission, giving the pianist a much-needed break. The woman stood up from the bench, her legs stiff. She stretched, rolled her shoulders, tried to process everything that was happening. Other staff members were looking at her differently now. Not like a coworker, but like someone who'd become something else entirely. The silver-haired man approached the stage, moving slowly but with purpose. He held out his business card. I'd like to talk to you when this is over. No pressure, no strings. But I think you have something special and I'd like to help if I can. She took the card, read the name. Her hand started shaking. She knew who this man was. Everyone in music knew who he was. He'd discovered some of the biggest names in the industry. You want to help me? I want to make sure what happened tonight isn't the last time you play for an audience. You belong on stages like this. Actually, you belong on bigger stages than this. Before she could respond, he smiled and walked back to his seat. The woman played for another 90 minutes before the event finally wound down. By the end, her fingers felt like they might fall off, but in the best possible way. The kind of tired that comes from using muscles you'd forgotten you had, from doing something that actually mattered. The final song was a request from a grandmother celebrating her 80th birthday. She wanted something uplifting, something joyful. The woman played a bright celebratory piece that had everyone clapping along. It was the perfect way to end the night on a note of pure happiness. When she played the last chord, the entire ballroom stood. The ovation went on for what felt like forever. People were taking photos, recording videos. Some were openly crying. Others were laughing and hugging each other. The energy in the room had completely transformed from the stuffy, formal affair it had been at the beginning. The coordinator took the microphone one final time. I think we can all agree that tonight turned out even better than we could have imagined. Let's give one more round of applause to our incredible pianist. More cheering, more applause. The woman stood and bowed, genuinely overwhelmed. She'd performed before back in her student days, but never like this. Never for an audience that felt this connected to what she was doing. As people began filing out, many of them stopped by the stage. They wanted to thank her personally, to shake her hand, to tell her how much the music had meant to them. A few pressed business cards into her palm. I run an event planning company. We'd love to have you perform at our functions. My daughter is getting married next spring. Would you be available? I own a restaurant downtown. We've been looking for a pianist for weekend dinners. She took the cards, nodded, smiled, but honestly couldn't process any of it. Her brain felt like it was running on fumes. Too much had happened too fast. The silver-haired man waited patiently until the crowd thinned. When he finally approached again, he had a notepad in his hand. I meant what I said earlier. I'd like to help. Here's what I'm thinking. He sat on the edge of the stage, and she sat down beside him, too tired to stand anymore. First, you need to record. Not some amateur phone recording. A real studio session. I still know people. We can make it happen. Then we take that recording and start shopping it around. Music schools, grant programs, competitions. You said you had to leave your conservatory program. There are scholarships for older students, for people who had to interrupt their education. You could go back, she shook her head. I can't afford to not work. I have bills, rent, loans to pay off from my mother's medical expenses, which is why you do both. There are programs that accommodate working students. Part-time study, evening classes. It won't be easy, but neither was what you did tonight. He wrote down some names and websites, organizations she'd never heard of, foundations that supported musicians trying to restart their careers, grant programs specifically for people who'd faced financial hardship. But more importantly, he continued, you need to be performing, regularly, building an audience. The woman running tonight's event, she has connections all over the city. I guarantee she'll want you at more functions. Start saying yes to those opportunities. Build a reputation. I don't even know if I'm good enough for all that. He looked at her like she'd just said the sky was green. Are you serious? Did you not hear that, audience? Did you not see grown adults crying over your original piece? That could have just been the moment. The story, the whole Waitress thing. No, his voice was firm. That was talent. Raw, undeniable talent. The kind I've spent my whole career looking for. Don't insult what you did tonight by pretending it was luck. She didn't know what to say to that. Part of her wanted to believe him. But another part, the part that had spent 2 years being invisible and unimportant, couldn't quite accept that this was real. The coordinator approached, holding a check. This is for you. Your payment for tonight. The woman looked at the amount and almost fell over. It was more than she made in a month of waitressing. This is too much. Actually, it's not enough. Several guests specifically left extra donations designated for you. This doesn't even include all of it. I'll need your banking information so I can transfer the rest. I don't understand. The coordinator smiled. They wanted to thank you. And honestly, you saved this entire event. You turned what could have been a disaster into the most successful fundraiser we've ever had. You earned every penny. After the coordinator walked away, the woman just stared at the check. This changed things. This meant she could pay her rent for 3 months, could pay down some of her debt, could maybe, just maybe, start thinking about the future differently. The silver-haired man stood up, groaning slightly as his knees protested. Think about what I said. Here's my personal number. He pointed to the card he'd given her earlier. Call me next week. We'll set up that recording session. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Because 40 years ago, someone took a chance on me when nobody else would. Now I'm old. I'm rich. And I don't need anything except to feel like I'm still contributing something meaningful. Let me do this. Not for you. For me? He walked away before she could argue. The ballroom was nearly empty now. The serving staff was cleaning up, stacking chairs, collecting abandoned champagne flutes. One of her co-workers, a guy she usually shared smoke breaks with, came over. So you're famous now, huh? She laughed. Hardly. Dude, you're all over social media. Someone posted a video of you playing that emotional piece. It's got like 50,000 views already. You're joking. He showed her his phone. Sure enough, there it was. A video someone had recorded of her playing After the Storm, tears running down her face. The comments were overwhelming. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Who is this woman? She needs a recording contract. I'm crying in my car listening to this. True talent doesn't need fancy packaging. She handed the phone back, feeling dizzy. This was too much, too fast. She needed to go home, process everything, figure out what any of this meant. She changed out of her uniform in the staff room, back into her regular clothes. Jeans, a hoodie, sneakers that didn't hurt her feet. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw the same person she'd been that morning. Except not really. Something had shifted. Something fundamental. Walking through the hotel lobby, she passed a window that reflected the now empty ballroom. The piano sat on the stage waiting for the next performer. 6 hours ago, she couldn't have imagined sitting at that piano. Couldn't have imagined any of what had happened tonight. Outside, the city was quiet. It was past 2 in the morning. She walked to the bus stop, too wired to feel tired despite the exhaustion in her bones. The business cards in her pocket felt like they weighed 100 pounds. The check felt even heavier. Her phone buzzed. A text from the coordinator. Thank you again for tonight. I've already gotten calls from 3 other organizations asking if you're available for their events.
Can we talk tomorrow about booking you?
She typed back a simple yes and hit send. The bus arrived, mostly empty at this hour. She took a seat by the window and watched the city roll past. Streetlights, closed shops, the occasional person walking their dog or heading home from a late shift. She thought about her mother. Wished desperately that she could call her right now, tell her everything that had happened. Her mom had been the one who'd first put her in piano lessons when she was 6, had driven her to recitals and competitions, had sacrificed so much to support her daughter's dream. I did it, Mom, she whispered to the window. I actually did it. 6 months later, she stood backstage at a concert hall downtown. A real concert hall with proper acoustics and tiered seating and programs printed with her name on them. Her debut recital. The silver-haired man had been true to his word. He'd set up recording sessions, made introductions, helped her apply for scholarships and grants. She'd gotten into a program for working professionals at a prestigious music school, classes twice a week, practice time at the school's facilities, and most importantly, a community of musicians who understood what she was trying to do. She'd quit the hotel, though she stayed in touch with some of her former co-workers. Now she pieced together income from private events, teaching piano lessons to kids in her neighborhood, and the occasional gig at upscale restaurants. It wasn't stable or secure, but it was music. Real music. The kind she'd dreamed about. The coordinator from that first gala had become almost a manager of sorts, connecting her with opportunities all over the city. The original video from that night had gone viral eventually, leading to a feature in the local newspaper and interviews on a few podcasts. People wanted to hear about the waitress who'd stepped up to the piano. She'd always downplay it in interviews. I wasn't really a waitress who could play piano. I was a pianist who happened to be waitressing. There's a difference. But tonight wasn't about the backstory. Tonight was about the music. She'd prepared for months, choosing pieces that meant something to her personally. Classical works that had sustained her through difficult times. Jazz standards that reminded her joy could be found anywhere. And yes, her original composition, After the Storm, which she'd finally finished and refined. She peeked out at the audience. The seats were filling up. She recognized some faces from that first night. The elderly woman who'd been skeptical. The silver-haired man who'd changed her life. The coordinator who'd taken a crazy chance. But she also saw strangers. People who'd heard about her and wanted to experience her playing firsthand. People who'd seen the videos and read the articles. People who just loved piano music and had bought tickets because the venue was offering something different. Her hands were shaking, just like they had 6 months ago. But this time she wasn't afraid of being seen. She'd learned that being visible, being vulnerable, being willing to put yourself out there despite every reason not to, that was where the real magic lived. The stage manager gave her the signal. 5 minutes. She took a deep breath, rolled her shoulders, and smiled. This was exactly where she was meant to be.